Under an old viaduct on a freezing night, a 15-year-old homeless black boy lived quietly with his handmade cart. One night, he heard a faint moan coming from a crashed car. Inside was a pregnant woman in critical condition. Without hesitation, he broke the window and rushed her to the hospital using his cart. That single act would change his life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The wind tore through the skeletal framework of the old viaduct, a forgotten relic that once ferried trains high above the city's sprawl. It whistled through rusted girders and past piles of discarded bottles. A biting cold that didn't just prick the skin but burrowed deep, lodging itself in the very marrow of the bones. Beneath this crumbling concrete behemoth, nestled among faded spray paint and sodden cardboard, a boy was curled inside a large, forgotten drainage pipe. His name was Leon, and he was 15 years old. Leon knew the city's nighttime silence intimately, the profound quiet that descended only after the last weary bus had rumbled past, after even the wail of sirens had finally faded into the distance. He knew which street lamps sputtered on and off, which dumpsters were left unlocked, and which stray cats could be trusted not to raid his meager provisions. Wrapped in a tattered blanket he had salvaged months ago, layered over a worn hoodie and jeans stiff with grime, he stared at the concrete ceiling of his makeshift shelter. His breath plumed into the frigid air, a transient puff of white, like smoke from a fire he could never hope to afford. Beside him, leaning against the damp pipe wall, was his most cherished possession, a homemade cart. It was a resourceful contraption, cobbled together from salvaged shopping trolley wheels, scraps of plywood, and a sturdy bungee cord. By day it was his faithful companion, hauling the metal scraps and recyclables he diligently collected. By night, it transformed, a pillow, a table, a shield against the indifferent world. He had given it a name, the Wanderer, a secret known only to him. Not long ago Leon had known a different life. He'd had a small room, humble but with a door that closed, offering a fragile sense of privacy. He'd had a mother whose gentle hum of gospel songs had been the soundtrack to folded laundry and quiet evenings. But life, relentless and unforgiving, had stripped these comforts away. Cancer, a cruel thief, had not waited for hope to bloom, and poverty, a relentless current, had not paused for a child to grow. After his mother's passing, his father, already a man broken by the crushing weight of false accusations and a deeply flawed justice system, had been taken away. Leon, in the aftermath, had simply slipped through the gaping cracks, becoming as unnoticed as a name forgotten during a roll call. He lived by a strict code, born of necessity and a fierce inner resilience. He never begged. He never asked for anything more than what he could trade for or earn through sheer hard work. There was a quiet, unyielding pride in this, a stubborn integrity that kept him upright even when the city seemed to bend its back, conspiring to crush him. He had learned the harsh lessons of survival. Keep your head low, your eyes sharp, your heart guarded. The world, he knew, did not offer safety or solace to boys like him, not unless they fought relentlessly for it, or simply vanished without a trace. That night, as the wind screamed its mournful song past the colossal concrete pillars, and the distant stars flickered faintly through a haze of urban pollution, Leon clutched his knees to his chest. He tried, with a weary determination, to banish the creeping numbness from his toes. His last meal had been half a granola bar that morning, washed down with sips of water from a cracked thermos he'd refilled at a public park fountain. Hunger was an old acquaintance, a constant companion. So was the cold. Loneliness, too, had long since ceased to be a stranger. Yet none of these familiar hardships truly frightened him anymore. What did stir a deep, unsettling fear within him, though he would never utter it aloud, was the chilling thought that this meager, unseen existence might be all there was. The fear that no one would ever truly see him for anything more than the dirt smudged on his face or the rickety cart he pulled. The fear that he would forever remain beneath viaducts and behind shadows, as invisible as the hairline fractures in the sidewalk. He rubbed his hands together, seeking a fleeting warmth, his knuckles raw and scabbed from a fall 2 days prior. He stared into the absolute darkness, as if it might, in its vast emptiness, offer some elusive answer. The silence around him was profound, absolute, but it would not last, for in the next hour the city, a sprawling, indifferent entity, would whisper a name it hadn't spoken in years, and under this very viaduct, where the forgotten sought refuge and the wind carried whispered secrets, Leon would make a choice that would irrevocably alter everything. Not because someone had asked him to, not because someone had promised him any reward, but because, even when the world collectively turns its back, some hearts simply refuse to stop burning, even in the biting cold, even in the suffocating dark. The sound reached Leon as a taut thread in the vast tapestry of the night. It was faint, trembling, almost lost beneath the grinding groan of a passing truck on the highway above. He froze, every fiber of his being suddenly alert. It wasn't the familiar scuttling of rats, nor the guttural rumble of distant engines, nor the incoherent ramblings he sometimes heard from nearby alleys. No. This was distinct. It was human, desperate, a low guttural moan, followed by a sharp intake of breath that sliced through the preternatural stillness like a freshly honed blade. Leon shot upright, instinct overriding the bone-deep fatigue that usually clung to him. He crawled out of the drainage pipe, his breath puffing out in stark white clouds against the oppressive darkness. His eyes scanned the deep shadows beyond the viaduct's concrete expanse. For a moment there was only the dull, ceaseless hum of the distant city, the fleeting glint of headlights from a far-off highway curve, the occasional flash of neon from businesses miles away. Then he heard it again. A voice, weak, strained, like someone desperately trying to suppress a scream that threatened to tear free. He grabbed his small, trusty flashlight from beneath an overturned crate, smacked it twice against his palm until it flickered hesitantly to life. Guided by the raw sound, he followed it down the embankment, past rusting chain-link fencing and discarded tires. The voice grew louder, more defined, raw with undisguised pain. It led him to a narrow, forgotten service road, a neglected artery of the city, bordered by more chain-link fences and glittering shards of broken glass. And there, nestled awkwardly in the shallow dip of a ditch, was a sleek silver vehicle. Its headlights were dim, its powerful engine lifeless. A high-end model, perhaps a luxury sedan, the kind of car Leon had only ever glimpsed on glossy billboards, or as it sped past too quickly for him to discern faces within. The driver's window was heavily fogged from the inside, but he could make out the indistinct silhouette of a woman slumped over the steering wheel. One arm was gripping the side door handle with white-knuckled desperation, the other wrapped tightly around her swollen belly. Her mouth was open, teeth clenched against some unseen torment, her eyes wide with pain. Her dress, a dark blue and elegantly cut, was soaked through with sweat. Leon took a cautious step closer, his small flashlight trembling almost imperceptibly in his grip. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice cautious but clear, cutting through the silence. No response. He tapped on the glass. She flinched, a sudden involuntary spasm turning her face slowly towards him. Her lips parted as if to speak, but only a faint whimper escaped. Her skin was ghastly pale, yet flushed with an unnatural heat. She looked as though she hadn't moved, hadn't been able to move, for hours. Leon circled the car, tried the door handle. Locked. He knocked again, harder this time. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, louder now, a thread of urgency weaving into his tone. Still no words, just another strained gasp, followed by a sudden, violent contraction that made her entire body seize and arch. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Leon's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. He looked frantically up and down the desolate road. No other cars, no people, no one was coming. The window. He hated the thought of breaking it, but the woman was clearly in active labor, alone and trapped. The thick frost on the glass confirmed the heater wasn't working, and the faint steam rising off her skin was a chilling testament to her body overheating. He stepped back, pulled a rusted tire iron from the wanderer, wrapping it carefully in his hoodie sleeve to cushion the blow and prevent slippage. Then he struck the side window near the edge, once, twice, until it spiderwebbed outward and then gave way with a dull, shattering pop. Shards of glass rained inward onto the seat, but the woman barely reacted. She was beyond fear now, beyond protest. Her world had narrowed to the overwhelming pain and the primal terror pressing against her from the inside. Carefully, Leon reached through the shattered window, found the lock, clicked it open, and pulled the door wide. The woman slumped heavily toward him, whispering something he couldn't understand through her ragged breaths. Up close, he could see her face more clearly. She was in her early 30s, perhaps even younger, beautiful in a way that only made the surreal situation feel even more jarring. Her lipstick had faded to a mere stain. Her elegant earrings had fallen somewhere into the footmat, and her purse lay spilled open on the passenger seat, a silver phone blinking its last desperate plea for a charge. Leon didn't waste precious seconds asking questions. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the hoodie from his arms, wrapping it firmly around her trembling shoulders. Then he wedged his own shoulder under her arm and, with a gentle but determined heave, lifted her out of the car. She screamed, a short, hoarse cry, but she didn't resist, simply leaning into his support. Her legs, heavy and unresponsive, barely moved. Every single step she took was a Herculean effort, a silent war against her body's betrayal. He guided her to the Wanderer, its rickety frame groaning audibly under the sudden, unexpected human weight. He had never before pushed it with a human life inside. He had never imagined it would carry anything more precious than cans and scrap metal. But tonight it would carry someone who still had time left, someone who carried another life, a new beginning waiting to be born. He wrapped his precious blanket securely around her, tying it down with old cords he kept for securing his loads. He gripped the handlebar tight, his knuckles white. Then, without a second thought, Leon ran. The sprawling, indifferent city didn't seem to notice him. He was just another fleeting shadow against the towering walls of concrete and brick, just another wheeled silhouette under the flickering, hazy streetlights. But Leon's muscles burned with an incandescent fire. His breath turned to vapor. His feet slapped against the cold, unforgiving pavement with a desperate, rhythmic urgency. Behind him, the stalled car's hazard lights blinked in solitary silence. Ahead of him, the hospital glowed, a distant beacon at least 12 long blocks away. He didn't know if he would make it in time. He only knew, with an unwavering certainty, that no one else was coming, and that if anyone was going to fight for this woman and the child clawing its way into the world, it had to be him. Leon's legs screamed with every pounding stride. The icy night air ripped at his throat, raw and burning, but he didn't slow down, not even for a moment. The wheels of his makeshift cart wobbled precariously over potholes and cracked, uneven sidewalks, each jarring bump jostling the woman beneath the blanket. Yet she never cried out again, her breaths coming in shallow, broken rhythms, her lips pressed tight, her face pale and contorted in silent agony. He could hear her murmuring now, fragmented whispers about the baby, about not being ready, about not being alone. But she was alone. They both were. There were no approaching headlights, no helpful bystanders, no blaring sirens, just the raw, relentless sound of rubber wheels scraping against concrete, and a boy who, by all accounts, had no business carrying the weight of another human life, but did so anyway, because no one else would. He turned abruptly down a dark alley, a desperate shortcut to shave precious minutes off the arduous journey. He dodged stagnant puddles and teetered past towering piles of old furniture, the Wanderer rattling violently with every sharp twist and turn. A dog barked somewhere in the far distance, its sound swallowed by the vastness of the city. Lights flickered from the upper floors of distant apartment buildings that might as well have been galaxies away. He passed shuttered stores, locked gates, and a brightly glowing "Open 24 hours" sign in the window of a corner store that he didn't dare stop at. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, locked onto the distant, hazy blue-white glow that marked the hospital. 12 blocks, then 10, then 8, and still the woman whispered in desperate, broken fragments. "He's coming. Hurts so much. Please, help." Leon gritted his teeth, pushing harder, forcing his protesting body forward. His chest burned, a searing pain with every ragged breath. His fingers had gone completely numb on the cold metal handle of his cart, but he kept going. At one point she screamed again, a sharp, animalistic sound that echoed off the alley walls like a fire alarm, tearing through the quiet night. He nearly lost control of the wanderer, the cart veering wildly, but he steadied it just in time, whispering hoarsely, "Almost there. Just hold on," though he didn't know if she even heard him. Blood. He saw it now, dark, ominous, pooling beneath her legs, seeping relentlessly through the tattered blanket. Panic surged in his gut, a cold, sickening wave. He pushed faster, harder, a desperate primal urgency propelling him forward. The cart bounced violently over the lip of a curb, nearly tipping over completely, and he caught it with his whole body, his knees scraping painfully against the rough asphalt as he fought to keep it upright. The hospital came into view like a blinding mirage, white, stark lights, motionless gleaming glass doors. A bold red cross glowing against the dark that had never looked more like salvation. But it wasn't over yet. The emergency entrance was at the far end, past the multi-storied parking structure and a busy loading dock. Leon didn't stop to yell for help. He didn't wave his arms or hope someone would spot him from a distant window. He ran straight for the automatic sliding doors, yanked the wanderer up the short ramp, and banged on the glass with both fists until the entire frame trembled. A nurse appeared inside, startled, then quickly confused. She saw the boy first, disheveled, wild-made, a raw embodiment of dirt and desperation. Then her gaze fell upon the woman on the cart, and everything changed in an instant. The doors hissed open. Voices, sharp and urgent, shouted from behind them. A team in scrubs poured out like a wave, a stretcher rolling swiftly forward, hands reaching, orders barked over crackling radios. "She's crowning," one yelled. "Baby's dropping," another called out. Leon stumbled back, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against his ribs as they lifted the woman from the wanderer with practiced precision and urgent speed. The blanket fell away. "More blood," someone exclaimed. The nurse looked at Leon, ready to bombard him with questions, but stopped abruptly when she truly saw his face. It was too young to be so empty, too old to be this invisible. "Where did she come from?" someone asked loudly. "Did he do this?" "No," the nurse said firmly, her voice resolute. "He brought her." Leon couldn't breathe. He leaned heavily against the cool hospital wall, sweat freezing against the back of his neck, his legs trembling uncontrollably beneath him. His cart, the wanderer, sat abandoned a few feet away, its wheels still spinning faintly, a smear of dark blood stark against its plywood base. He didn't know if she would make it. He didn't know if he would be blamed, arrested, or simply forgotten again. All he knew, with a certainty that settled deep into his bones, was that he'd gotten her here, that somehow, against every obstacle the world had placed in his way, he had delivered a complete stranger through the brutal cold, the suffocating dark, and the crushing silence, and into a place where someone else might finally, truly, care. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold, tiled floor, just inside the wide hospital doors, watching as the medical team disappeared with her into the bright, almost blinding depths of the emergency room. Her moans echoed faintly for a moment behind them, then vanished, swallowed by the sterile quiet. And for the very first time that night, there was nothing left for him to do. The fluorescent lights inside the hospital burned with an oppressive intensity, buzzing faintly like a restless swarm of invisible insects. Leon squinted against their harsh glare, his body sagging as the adrenaline which had fueled him for so long began to drain from his veins. He sat slumped just beyond the threshold, his shoulders pressed against the cool wall, his legs stretched out across the tile floor like he'd forgotten how to hold them up anymore. Nurses moved around him like silent currents in a river, mostly avoiding eye contact but whispering to each other when they passed. His cart sat a few feet away, forgotten in the corner, blood still drying in dark streaks on its wooden base. One wheel stubbornly clicked, a faint rhythmic sound every time it shifted subtly on its own. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours, Leon couldn't tell. He didn't ask questions, he didn't call out for anyone. He wasn't even sure he had the strength. All he could do was stare fixedly at the long, bright hallway where they had taken her. The woman he didn't know, whose name he still didn't have, but whose life now felt inextricably tethered to his. like two small boats lashed together in the midst of a violent storm. He wiped his hands on his grimy jeans, leaving faint smears of rust-colored blood across the knees. His fingers trembled, not from fear or cold this time, but from the unfamiliar, unsettling ache of not knowing what came next. A man approached him. He was security, broad shoulders, dark uniform, and eyes that held a deeply skeptical gaze. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice low and clipped. "You brought her in?" Leon nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of his head. "Name?" The boy opened his mouth, then hesitated. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want more questions, more scrutiny, but lying would only make things worse. "Leon," he said softly, his voice thin. "That's it?" The guard pressed, his voice flat. Leon nodded again. The man eyed him, then glanced at the wanderer. "You related to her?" Leon shook his head slowly. She was in a car. It wasn't running. She couldn't move. He didn't elaborate. He didn't mention the broken glass or the woman's screams or the pooling blood, just the facts, just what mattered. The guard stared at him for a beat longer than necessary, then muttered something into the walkie-talkie clipped to his shoulder, and walked off without another word. Another woman approached, this time wearing teal scrubs and a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She knelt beside Leon, her voice softer, gentler than the guard's. "You okay, honey?" He nodded, though his aching body said otherwise. "You hungry? Thirsty?" He nodded this time to both questions. She handed him a bottle of water and a package of crackers. His numb fingers fumbled clumsily with the wrapper as she sat down beside him, her knees creaking softly as they hit the floor. "What's your last name, Leon?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "Where can we call?" He hesitated, chewing slowly on a cracker, buying himself time. "I don't have anyone," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "No family?" she asked gently, her gaze kind. He shook his head. "Not anymore." A profound silence settled between them, filled only by the low buzz of the lights and the distant, rhythmic beeping of machines down the long hallway. Then, the ER doors burst open and a nurse rushed through, clipboard in hand, calling urgently for an attending physician. Leon watched as she disappeared, his chest tightening involuntarily. "She's going to be okay," the woman beside him said, as if reading his very thoughts. "The doctors are doing everything they can." More footsteps, more hurried motion. Then finally a voice came from the corridor, calm but clear and loud. "We've got a pulse on the baby. She's stabilizing. Let's move her to OB." The tension in Leon's chest loosened, just slightly, like a belt being unclasped after hours of unbearable pressure. She wasn't gone. Not yet. The woman in scrubs touched his shoulder gently. "You saved her, you know that." Leon didn't answer. He didn't nod. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes glazed with something too complex for his young age. Gratitude, fear, disbelief, perhaps all of it swirling together. Then, without another word, he stood. He grabbed the handle of the wanderer and turned toward the glass doors. They hissed open at his approach, letting in a gust of cold, raw air that lifted the hem of his hoodie and scattered a few loose crumbs from the crackers still clutched in his hand. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for applause, for recognition, for a thank you that might never come. He stepped into the night, swallowed once more by the silence he knew too well. The kind of silence only a vast city could offer to the ones it never truly meant to see. The morning broke slow and gray, casting a muted light that made the city feel quieter than it truly was. Inside the hospital, tucked into a private recovery room on the 3rd floor, Eleanor Vance opened her eyes to a world she barely recognized. The antiseptic tang in the air, the faint reassuring hum of machines, the soft rustle of curtains being drawn. It all collided with the last fractured shards of memory she had before blacking out. The car, the freezing air, the pain like fire blooming in her spine, and then a face. A boy's face, young, dark, afraid, yet so incredibly steady. There had been blood, a voice calling her name, though she'd never given it, and then movement. The cold wind in her hair, the distinct creak of wheels beneath her, the clatter of footsteps pounding the pavement with the frantic rhythm of a heartbeat. She turned her head slowly, wincing as the IV line tugged at her skin. In the small bassinet beside her a newborn slept, impossibly small and impossibly real beneath a knitted blue blanket. She blinked at him, tears gathering in her eyes before she could stop them. He was here, alive, somehow. The nurse who entered a few minutes later confirmed it all. There had been complications, grave ones, but both mother and child were now stable. It had been close, the nurse said, her voice grave. Too close. If she'd arrived even 10 minutes later, they might not have been able to save either of them. Eleanor listened in silence, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, even though it was already flat, empty of its precious cargo. But her mind wasn't on the nurse, or the machines, or even the beautiful baby sleeping beside her. It was on him, the boy, the one who'd found her, the one who broke the window, pulled her out and dragged her through the harrowing night like he owed her something, even though she knew, with absolute certainty, that he didn't. She asked the nurse immediately, her voice strained. Where was he? Had anyone spoken to him? Did they know his name? The nurse hesitated, her brow furrowed in confusion. "He didn't stay long," she said. "Didn't leave a number, just a first name." Leon. The name resonated through Eleanor's mind like a solitary bell, not because she knew him, but because, somehow, it felt like she should have. She was Eleanor Vance, wife of Thomas Vance, a billionaire real estate mogul, head of the Vance Foundation, the face of countless philanthropic campaigns that smiled down from subway billboards and graced the covers of magazines. She gave speeches about societal change, about caring for the forgotten, about giving back to the community. Yet, when the moment of true crisis came, it wasn't policy or privilege that saved her. It was a kid from the shadows with nothing in his pockets but sheer nerve and raw instinct. It was a child the world had, by all appearances, discarded. Later that day, Thomas arrived. He moved through the hospital like a force of nature. Tall, commanding, immaculately dressed in a suit even now, his presence filling the sterile room. For a moment, when he saw Eleanor, his face paled, and the usual veneer of arrogance slipped, revealing a raw, unvarnished fear. He rushed to her side, kissed her forehead tenderly, and looked at the baby with something akin to awe. But when she recounted what had happened, every detail she could recall between the contractions and the chaos, his expression shifted. He straightened, his jaw tightening. "Who is this boy?" he asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Security said he left before they got his full name. Eleanor shook her head, a weariness settling into her bones. "He said Leon. That's all I know." Thomas sprang into action, like a man preparing for a complex, vital operation. He pulled out his phone, calling their publicist, their foundation manager, their personal driver. Within the hour, a press release had been drafted. Within the next, a dedicated team had been deployed, tasked with tracking down Leon through hospital security footage, city street cameras, and local shelters. Eleanor didn't object. She wanted to find him too, but not to offer money, not to pat him on the head and say well done like he was some obedient pet. She wanted to look him directly in the eyes and say thank you. A real thank you. The kind that didn't come wrapped in charity initiatives or sensational headlines. She wanted to know how someone with so incredibly little had given so much. News outlets caught wind of the story before long. A heroic teen had rescued a prominent philanthropist and her newborn from near death, then vanished without a trace. Speculation ran wild. Talk shows buzzed with theories. Some painted him as a saint, others a clever hoax. But the image was undeniably real. A still frame from a security camera positioned outside the emergency room. A boy, thin, hooded, pushing a makeshift cart like his very life depended on it, his eyes locked ahead as if nothing else in the world existed but the woman bleeding behind him and the hospital doors that might not open fast enough. Eleanor stared at that photo for hours, her baby sleeping peacefully beside her, Thomas making calls in the other room, his voice a low murmur. "We owe him everything," she whispered, not to Thomas, not to the cameras, but to herself, a solemn vow. And in that moment she made a commitment, not the performative kind. not the kind that dissipates once the headlines fade. She vowed to find Leon, not to rescue him, not to fix him, but to see him fully, truthfully, the way he had seen her that night, a human being in desperate need and worth saving. They found him 3 days later, not through official police records or the databases of homeless shelters, because Leon didn't belong to any of those systems. He was the kind of boy who didn't leave traceable footprints where he walked, but someone had seen the grainy security photo. An old man named Silas who collected bottles near the same stretch of viaduct every morning. He recognized the cart, not the face. "Kid keeps to himself," Silas had told the volunteers. "Got this limp on his right side, always patching up the wheels with duct tape. Kind of cart you remember." And that, against all odds, was enough. Eleanor arrived just after sunset. She had insisted on going herself, steadfastly refusing to send handlers or security personnel or anyone with a clipboard and a practiced smile. She wore no makeup, dressed simply in jeans and a coat too big for her hair pulled back, her expression calm but locked in a quiet purpose. The SUV eased off the service road, its tires crunching softly over gravel and broken glass. Headlights cut across the towering columns of the old viaduct, where the wind howled through like it always did, a desolate symphony. And there he was. Leon stood behind a trash bin, meticulously sorting cans into a plastic sack, his back turned, completely unaware that a new chapter of his life was moving directly toward him. When the engine stopped and the car door opened softly, he froze, his head lifting slightly like a wary deer sensing a presence in the woods. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers across the dim space. For a moment neither spoke. Eleanor stepped forward carefully, deliberately, as if she knew any wrong move, any sudden gesture, might send him bolting, vanishing back into the shadows. She hadn't brought a camera crew. No news vans. No grand, performative gestures, just her and a baby wrapped snugly in her arms, a quiet bundle of new life swaddled in soft cotton, breathing gently against her chest. "You remember me?" she asked, her voice softer than he expected, not like the voices that usually reached him, stern, skeptical, or laced with fear. This one carried weight, but not threat. Leon nodded once, his lips parting, unsure whether he should speak. "You saved us," she said, her gaze steady, encompassing both herself and the tiny bundle she held. "Me and him." She tilted her chin slightly toward the sleeping child. "His name's Leo." Leon looked down at the baby, then back up at her. The lines of suspicion were still etched across his young face, a deeply ingrained habit of protection, but something subtle loosened in his shoulders. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough, as if it hadn't been used for days, raw from disuse. Eleanor smiled. Not the practiced, polite smile of a philanthropist on camera, but the kind of genuine smile that cracked something real, revealing a vulnerability beneath. "We are," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "Because of you." He shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to do with his hands, glancing toward the wanderer, the only thing that had never let him down, that had been his constant. "I didn't do it for," he started, but she shook her head gently, cutting him off. "I know you didn't do it for thanks or money or a headline," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "That's precisely why it matters so much." From the SUV, the driver stepped out and quietly opened the trunk. Inside were 2 large duffel bags and a sealed envelope. Eleanor didn't look at them. Her gaze remained fixed solely on Leon. "I want to help you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not because you saved my life, but because you matter. And you deserve more than this." She gestured gently, inclusively, at the cold cement, at the rattling cart, at the makeshift blanket he had tied into a crude bed. Leon stared at her, a long, searching gaze seeking lies, hidden traps, the subtle strings that often came attached to what people called kindness, strings you didn't see until you were hopelessly tangled. But he didn't find them. Just her. Just a woman who had nearly died, who now stood in the very place he slept, holding a child she wouldn't have known without his intervention. "I don't want your money," he said at last, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I don't need to be saved." Eleanor nodded, the wind tugging gently at her coat. "I'm not offering to save you," she replied, her voice filled with quiet strength. "I'm offering to stand beside you, to open a door, not to drag you through it." There was a silence between them then, a profound stillness filled with everything neither of them had the words to articulate. Then Leon did something he hadn't done in months, perhaps even longer. He stepped forward, not all the way, not into the car, not into her world, but close enough to look down at the baby again, whose tiny fist was curled innocently around a piece of the soft blanket. "He's strong," Leon said, a hint of wonder in his voice. "So are you," Eleanor replied, her voice soft. They didn't hug, they didn't cry, but something profound passed between them, something neither the news cameras nor the money nor the public could ever truly touch or comprehend. It was the recognition of a shared truth, a simple, unvarnished truth. The kind of truth that didn't need to be polished or sold, the kind of truth that, if people allowed it, had the power to change them from the inside out. Eleanor handed him the envelope. "Inside is an address," she said. "A place to sleep, food, clothes, school if you want it. No contracts, no obligations, just a door. You decide if you want to walk through it." Leon didn't take it right away. He looked at her one last time, a lingering, searching gaze, trying to see if she would flinch, if the look in her eyes would change now that she'd made her offer, but it didn't. And so, finally, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly, took the envelope, and nodded once. Eleanor turned back toward the car, baby Leo tucked close against her. And Leon stood beneath the old viaduct, the place that had once felt like his only home, and now, just maybe, looked a little more like a past. 1 year later, the city looked different. Not because the skyline had miraculously changed or the streets had grown cleaner or quieter overnight. Those kinds of sweeping transformations rarely happened all at once, but because a story had taken root deep within its concrete heart. A story people kept telling, quietly, persistently, even after the headlines had long since faded, and at the very center of that story stood a boy in a navy blazer, a little too big for his still-growing frame, standing behind a podium in front of a crowd that had never seen him before, but already believed they knew exactly who he was. Cameras clicked, a soft flutter of shutters, phones lifted, recording every moment. The gleaming gold seal of the mayor's office shone behind him, reflecting the stage lights, and Leon, now 16 years old and still learning how to navigate life above ground, cleared his throat. In a room full of people waiting eagerly to hear the sound of his voice, he glanced down at the note card someone had printed for him, stiff and white, sitting like awkward strangers in his hands. He could read them, he could recite all the right words, the carefully crafted phrases. But when he looked up, saw Eleanor standing in the front row, baby Leo balanced comfortably on her hip, a quiet, tearful smile gracing her face, he set the cards aside. And he just spoke. "I don't think I'm a hero," he began, his voice low but steady, carrying easily across the hushed room. "I think I was scared, cold, tired, and I saw someone who needed help. That's it. That's all it was. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her husband was famous. I didn't even know if the hospital would let us through the door. But I knew what it looked like when someone was in pain, and I knew what it felt like when no one showed up, so I showed up." A profound hush fell over the room, the kind that stretched wide and deep, because nobody wanted to miss a single unscripted word. Leon shifted his weight, gripping the sides of the podium, his knuckles white. "He used to live under a viaduct. I had a cart, a blanket, and no reason to believe anyone would ever notice me, not unless I was in the way, not unless I did something wrong. But that night, something right happened. And now, I'm standing here, in this jacket, in this school, in this life, and sometimes I still wonder if it's really mine." There were murmurs in the back of the room, a few people openly dabbing at their eyes. A man from the city council leaned forward, his hands folded, his gaze unwavering, fixed on Leon. Leon took a deep, steadying breath. They say what I did was brave. But you want to know the truth? It wasn't bravery, it was instinct. It was kindness. And kindness isn't some big, dramatic thing, it's just a choice. A decision you make in the moment when nobody's watching, and nobody's paying you, and nobody's going to put your name in lights. He paused, his gaze sweeping out over the crowd, past the decorative banners, the expensive suits, the gold lettering on the wall behind them. I'm not special. I'm not different. I was just given a chance. A door opened, I stepped through. That's it. But there are a lot of kids still out there who haven't found that door, kids who are smart and strong and quiet and tired, kids who would carry the whole world on their back if someone would just look them in the eye and tell them they matter. The applause didn't erupt. It unfolded, slowly at first, then swelling, full and resonant, rising like something sacred, filling the vast hall. Eleanor pressed her hand over her heart, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Leo cooed softly in her arms, his eyes wide and curious, taking it all in. Leo nodded once, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement, then stepped back from the microphone and let the moment land the way it needed to, not as a victory, not as a reward, but as a beginning. Afterward, as people mingled and shook hands and dropped congratulations like bright confetti, Leon walked out into the hall alone. No fanfare, no cameras chasing him this time. He found a quiet window that looked out over the city that had once forgotten him, now bending just slightly in his direction. The streets below were as busy as ever, cars threading through traffic lights, faces turned to phones, and sidewalks bustling with people unaware. But somewhere out there, hidden from view, was a viaduct, and a pipe, and a patch of cold ground that used to be a home. He hadn't been back since the night Eleanor found him again. He hadn't needed to. Some places you leave, not because you hate them, but because they taught you how to go. And as he stood there, taking in the late afternoon light, he caught a glimpse of movement on the street below. Eleanor, standing on the sidewalk outside the building, her coat pulled close, one hand cradling Leo, the other shielding her eyes as she looked up. She didn't wave. She didn't call his name. He just smiled, a soft, proud smile, like someone who knew exactly what it had cost him to stand where he stood, and who loved him not just for what he'd done, but for the quiet strength it took to keep going after it all. As the building emptied and the sun dropped lower, casting long shadows, Leon stood there a little longer, letting the warmth of the glass soak through him. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew this much. You don't need a house to have a heart. You don't need a title to do what's right. And you don't have to be grown to be good. You just have to care enough to show up, enough to act, even when no one sees you. Especially then. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.